you could tell your story when you broke your neck. Tell that whole part, like they take you in the ambulance. Tell that whole story, because it was so easy for you to say, "I'm never going to walk. This is going to be bad." But just kind of walk us through. I think that's a great illustration of this.
I think that I knew the Lord when I was a little guy, and my mom and dad were really faithful. Taught us, and early on, it was easy to believe that the Lord was who He said He was. There wasn't much temptation to doubt that. And I broke my neck when I was 17, and I remember there was about 20 minutes where I laid out on the field, and it didn't hurt that bad. So I was trying to move and get up because I knew the guys on the sideline were making fun of me, because we always made fun of anybody laying out on the field. Like, looking out there, they're looking for sympathy. So I knew the guys were saying, and so I was trying to, I just couldn't move a muscle. And so I didn't know exactly what was going on, except I remember once they finally got me off of there, and I could move my eyes, and I've never been able to move my ears, and so that was about all in my mouth, and I can talk and I can think, but I just couldn't move anything. And so on the ride on the ambulance, and it was only about 3 minutes probably from the football field to the hospital, and I remember thinking, I think for the first time, I am really going to get to know God in a different way. Wow. Because this whole deal isn't looking like it might go easy. And it was really a huge peace. That when you talk about the peace that surpasses all understanding, that I don't think the unbeliever can really grasp. There was that, and then there's been that from 34 and a half years now. There's been that. And so it was an amazing, and as preacher, yes, and Scott, just because when I think back on it, I just think it was an amazing deal that it didn't seem like it was an effort to trust God, but He overwhelmed it with grace. So just like in justification, I think it's His doing. I think He absolutely knew that if He would have left me on my own, I would have had a huge amount of doubt. But He who began a good work just determined that He was going to carry it on to completion. And any time anything could have went wrong, it just hasn't. Anything could have went right has happened twice, you know, in the whole deal. And it's been, I don't know how to explain it, except that it's just been 100 times better than what I thought. And so you think about it and you say, would you give up, well, any trial is like this, would you give up 1% of what God's teaching you? Wow. And you would say, absolutely not. God's grace is sufficient. His power is made perfect in weakness. And that grace is way better to go through the trial and experience the grace than not to go through the trial at all. Now, I didn't think that this afternoon, as I was so cranky about the trials. But that, I think, I know that to be true. That it is worth whatever trial the Lord will bring through, because His grace, once you're justified, that, you know, in sanctification, His grace will be sufficient. So I don't know that that really answered the question, but
Jerry, verses 21 and 22, I think just what you explained, fully convinced that God was able to do what He had promised. I mean, you were convinced, even in that ambulance, that you trusted God.
But you know what? I don't think it was my choice even to be convinced. He was the convincer. So I think that's the amazing thing, is God produces the faith and then gives us sort of the reward someday for it, maybe in heaven, however how that works. But I didn't feel like there was a day where it's like, am I going to believe or am I not? God overwhelmed the whole situation with His grace and with His just one blessing after another. Like, out of the overflow of His grace, He's given us one blessing after another. And that's just how it's been ever since then.
Just on that, like, how can we
how can we grow closer to those kinds of things? What are, yeah, how do we grow in our ability to trust the Lord in any kind? It could be small things, it could be larger things.
I know at that time what I really needed was the Bible, you know, and to read the truth, because the lies would want to sneak in there. I remember one time, it was probably, 10 days after I got hurt, and I was in this little holding hospital for a few days before they could get me to the real deal to start working on stuff. And I remember thinking, I was laying there, and I had my halo on. There was this thing that was screwed into my head. So I was laying there like this, and I started thinking, uh-oh, what happens if there's, and it was like I got this, but like a fire. Or what happens if I have to scratch my nose? Or what happens if I have to, you know, like do these things. And again, there was this huge peace that surpasses all understanding that came. So the lies, I think, get bombarded by the truth of God's Word. And what I think it's Scott writes is that faith always looks at the problems in the light of the promises. Faith looks at the problems in light of the promises. And so do we really believe that all things are working together for good to those who love God and are called according to His purpose? Or do we really believe that He who gave us His own Son will also, along with Him, graciously give us all things? So I didn't have any idea of all of the fringe benefits that were going to come from the spinal cord injury. And just how many things, you know, and this is not to embarrass Steve, but like one of the things I'm so overwhelmed with is just that, and a lot of you guys got to get up by yourself in the morning. That seems like a huge disadvantage. Because it's so much more fun when someone gets to come in. So we get this built-in time, an hour and 15 minutes in the morning to, you know, to be together and to enjoy that fellowship. And when I broke my neck, I wouldn't have thought about that. And I wouldn't have thought about 7 different guys that say, hey, Monday morning I'm going to come over 5 o'clock. I'm going to get up in the 4s, you know, and then Tuesday morning, Steve, and Wednesday morning, you know, Carrie, and they're just going to be. And so those kind of things God's going to do more than we can ask or imagine through these trials. But I think that statement there, faith always looks at the problems in light of the promises. So I would say, grab the promises, meditate on them day and night, and just let those override the, but man, I'm such a hypocrite saying that because I don't do it. But I think it's still the truth.